Ernest Haight made quilts like an engineer, and over the years he came up with several time-saving innovations. In the 1970s, he wrote this in a letter. As an engineering college graduate, I think in terms of methods as well as aesthetics. As a trained engineer, Ernest valued mathematical precision and extreme accuracy. In other words, to Ernest, every quilt was another puzzle to solve.
When we have quilt shows, I show some of these puzzles to illustrate that I'm intrigued by puzzles and that every new quilt block pattern is a puzzle, to choose and arrange the colors, the different sizes and shapes of pieces, then how best to assemble them into blocks and quilt tops, preferably using assembly line methods.
Ernest devised a method to quickly quilt a quilt with his new electric sewing machine in about 8 to 10 hours, which was a fraction of the time that his wife or his mother would spend on quilting. Ernest's diamond grid quilting pattern was something he devised for use mostly on utility quilts that would be used frequently. And Isabel and Flora continued to hand quilt a lot of the quilts that he would put into the fairs like Butler County Fair and Nebraska State Fair. However, Ernest started entering his machine quilted quilts in the fairs and found that those quilts, like this one, also received prizes.
I found by trial and error how I could really do prize-winning work, as evidenced by the many first and second premiums I've received at our county and state fairs.
Many of Ernest's quilt patterns had a lot of little pieces in them, and in Ernest's quest to be efficient and use assembly line methods, he decided he would find a way to do this faster. So rather than cutting out all the little tiny squares in a quilt pattern, he decided he could sew strips together and then cut pre-sewn units. Quilt of 1,000 Prints has a random look to all the patterns of the squares, but actually we can see where Ernest's strips are by identifying several that are identical. For example, each of these squares is the same on these two lines, but because they're placed further apart from each other, you don't realize that it's a repetition. Bachelor's Puzzle quilt is a pattern that Ernest made many times, and in part of his effort to solve the puzzle problem of making a quilt, he realized that there was an opportunity to create multiple, what we call half-square triangles. It's a square that has half one color and half another color. This pattern has many of them throughout the quilt. This is in Ernest's book, Practical Machine Quilting for the Homemaker, where he illustrates how he did half-square triangles. Ernest drew a grid of lines on the back of a piece of fabric, and then he drew diagonal lines through them, and then he sewed a line of stitches on each side of the diagonal line. And then he cut apart the grid in both directions, and then cut on the drawn diagonal line. And those little triangles that he had cut out, when he opened them, they became two color squares.